Hello and welcome to Diversity Matters, a podcast exploring issues related to the media and inclusion. In this episode, we find out about the Media Diversity Index, with findings of the 12th country in the pilot stage, the UK, just being released. The index, produced by the Media Diversity Research Centre, is the first of its kind, and it has big ambitions. Its aim is to act as a barometer for progress or backsliding in the field of media diversity, a tool for the media industry, policymakers and others involved in the fields. Naomi Sakr is a professor of media policy at the University of Westminster and a former director of the Camry Arab Media Centre. She's been leading the pilot and joins me to explain how it works and why it's needed. Naomi, let's start with the fact that you're just adding the 12th country to this index, which is the UK. Tell me about what we know about the state of UK media when it comes to diversity.
Actually, the UK does fare pretty well on the index, but it's by no means perfect. So where it scores well is because it's got a regulator for audiovisual a converged regulator for audiovisual and telecoms, which has got a fairly sort of robust remit, which it takes seriously. But there's a lot of discussion around that, I suppose, because the more detailed and focused you get in terms of sort of regulation and enforcement, the more room for improvement is going to come into view. So that's for the sort of Ofcom side of things. When it comes to the press, it's a much less clear story because there are two press regulators. The big one, Ip4, attracts a lot of complaints and criticism. And Impress, which is the one that is, we call it Leveson compliant. So that goes back to the Leveson review that came out of the phone hacking scandal. And we're going back quite a long way here. And the Leveson review had two tranches. And the second one has not been followed up, and as a result of which press regulation is still pretty much a mess, I would say. But that's my very unscientific summary.
Information is quite mixed, as you outlined. So is this quite typical that the results are very mixed? There's good in some, room for improvement in others.
Yes. I mean, I think it depends on a lot of it depends on the institutions you've got in place. So, for example, the way the index is designed, it's based on a questionnaire. And the questionnaire looks at four approaches to diversity. So there's the law and regulation side. There's the workforce, diversity of the workforce and recruitment side. There's the content side, right? So that's all governance. Then you've got content. And content is very hard to measure. We'll come back to that. And then fourthly, we look at complaints handling. And so across those four sectors, you have 6 actors that we focus on. And the strength of the institutions in those different groups are what's going to decide your outcomes. So if you have a union representing journalists that has got a lot of credibility, big membership, is independent, and is serving its community, then they will be following up on diversity issues. If you have a national human rights institution, which most countries do, but there are international guidelines as to how independent they actually are and how effective they actually are. So they're depending on where your national human rights institution stands in that sort of measurement, they will have the powers to follow up on issues of discrimination, with legal action and so on. A lot of countries, a lot of people who work in human rights are not who work in human rights, but who work in media are not necessarily aware that these countries have a human rights institution that, in the UK, it's the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and every country has one. So, I mean, what I'm trying to point out is it's the sort of the credibility, independence, and proactiveness of the institutions on each of these that would help to determine what you end up with.
We'll come back to content in a minute, but first, I guess this is a perfect point to just highlight why this index is different to the other sort of media or democracy indices that are out there, And why is it needed?
Well, it's needed because there isn't one, and because diversity, I mean, there's just like the thinking is getting so polarized about what is meant by diversity and so on. Okay, so why is it needed? I think the best demonstration of that was when we came to do the pilot, right? We had to narrow down the number of countries, and it was difficult to decide, like, what would be the criteria. So if you just wanted to do a dozen countries, how would you choose them? So we knew that we wanted to do Europe. We knew that we wanted a reasonable selection, north, south, east, and west. So what happened was I took two existing indices, the Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy Index and the Reporters Sans Frontières Press Freedom Index. And the thing about them is that then the number of countries is relatively similar. I think it's 165, 180. And in some cases, like, the Nordics and, they rank exactly the same on both indices or indexes. But there are some countries where there is a huge discrepancy. And we managed to make up our dozen countries out of that list where there's a difference of ranking of 45 or something really dramatic. I mean, not all of them were that dramatic, but anyway, we took 12 with the biggest discrepancies. And I think the fact that obviously if you're measuring democracy and the institutions and the processes of democracy, it's different from the methodology that the Reporters Sans Frontières uses to measure press freedom. And they're looking at different things, so you get a different outcome. Neither of them is focused on diversity. And I checked very diligently to see if anybody else has come close to doing a media diversity index. I got a huge handbook of indexes of various sort of social mobility, gender equality in the workplace and so on. And media diversity was not in there. So we definitely are pioneering with this. And the point to make it about it is that not everybody, when they think media diversity, they tend to think only content. They don't necessarily think governance as well. The governance part is actually 3 sections out of the 4.
So what do you hope this index will do? Like, who will use it? Or who do you hope will use it, and in what way? Like, what value will this index have for those different sectors, the media, the content, and the administrators or the
well, the thing is, so when we did the first round of looking at the rankings of the countries, it was kind of obvious that there were 3 tiers, right? There are those where what's written into law and regulation is aspiring, is very aspirational and is actually being achieved a lot, but there is obviously like loopholes and, as it were, like I said, the more you go into the detail, the more there's room for criticism. Then you've got a second tier where the principles are there, but the practice leaves a lot to be desired. And in those places, you can tell that, there's fine words, but you actually need to meet those. And you can see, like by doing this index, you can see where practice is not living up to what is actually written into, rules and regulations and codes of practice or, guidelines and so on. So there's a room there for kind of what I would call targeted advocacy, whereas sort of knocking at an open door. It's not as if you're trying to sort of overturn systems. You're just trying to point out to people, look, this is what you're hoping for, but it's not being achieved. The other thing, really if you want to back that up, you need actually sort of objective monitoring. And a lot of the time, and I mean, this is what I want to sort of follow up with the index, is that the monitoring is very patchy. So if you take the section where we do look at content, in the best cases, there are the academic studies, there's the media monitoring, there's the bodies themselves that do their own monitoring that can give you some kind of statistics or examples, some kind of scientific basis for giving a judgment. But then there's other cases where there isn't even a kind of any measuring of gender disparity in media sources and media reporting and media subject matter. So in those cases, it's obvious that that needs to start.
So you hope that this will lead to some more monitoring, some more
And
sort of filling in those
it will
gaps.
it shows where the gaps are.
Well, that's kind of the point of the index, right? Is to highlight all the things that need addressing so that people actually have some proper researched information and facts to base decisions and policies and actions on.
Yeah, but you don't want it to be so hopeless that you don't know where to start.
Is it that hopeless that we don't know?
No, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I think that's one benefit of the index. And there's kind of the detailed, I mean, in what we've put out so far, because it was only a pilot, I have to stress this. And the UK is still part of that pilot process. There will be further refinement of the questionnaire and so on. The purpose is just to demonstrate that, that you can actually, by focusing in on certain issues and questions, you can get a debate and a discussion going.
Let's circle back to one of the sort of areas that your index is looking at, and that's content. You raised it. Because, as you said, there's different elements to this index that you're looking at. What are you trying to find with the content? Because surely there's other studies that look at representation in content. So
other studies, yes, but they're very random, right? So the whole point is that we're looking at protected characteristics plus. So there's a whole list of aspects of diversity that we want to look for in commercial media, in public service media, in state media, across the board. And in entertainment and in news and current affairs, right? So there's these different categories. Like if you did a matrix of how many different types of media, how many different genres, how many different aspects of diversity are we looking at? That is a kind of a massive spreadsheet, right? So that's why studies of representation are very welcome and fantastic. They do not cover every square on that matrix. Do you get me?
I do, but it sounds colossal. This is a huge amount of information. It must take a very long time to, one, work out how to measure it and what you're going to focus on, but to actually collect the information.
Yes. So that's why as we develop the index, we're going to have to be more explicit about the kind of media, so like difference between commercial and public service and so on. And then within commercial, there are different categories. And so we were relying in terms of sort of top 10 in terms of audience, but that in itself is quite difficult for people to work out. So, I mean, that's a whole area. I mean, we managed it with the pilot and it was reasonably self-explanatory, but I think there is work to be done because there's so many different types of commercial media now, and especially in the UK as well. So broadcasters that get into trouble with Ofcom, and Ofcom is rethinking how it deals with them. So things are very fluid, really.
I'm going to say the media environment is very fluid because of lots of challenges, lots of changes, technology being one of them, funding the other, but it's changing so quickly. So I'm guessing another challenge is to be able to, if this becomes a yearly or I don't know what the ambition is for how often you would produce this index, but how do you get all that information in a timely manner so that it's still relevant by the time you publish the index?
Well, the thing about doing an index is that it should ideally be a snapshot at a particular point. So when you're comparing countries, you're comparing them at the same time. So with the first part of the pilot, I should say the pilot was originally meant to be 12 countries, but we didn't get a return for Hungary, unfortunately. So it came out at 11. Now the UK has become the 12th pilot country. And it wasn't conducted, that pilot was not conducted at the same time as the other. If we were to do an annual exercise, it would need to be done within the same month, which is how we did the pilot. It was done, the returns were done during November 2024.
Is there a lot of interest in the index, and who do you think will use it? Like, who's the main target audience for it?
So media advocacy groups. So I would say media freedom advocacy, but it's not just freedom, it's freedom with responsibility. So there are a lot of groups that look at media law. So it's not just groups that care about diversity, let's put it like that. Any NGO that is involved in improving media regulation or improving media performance, I mean, it should be on their radar as a new data set, as it were, that they can refer to.
Is the ambition to go global?
I think, yes. I mean, ultimately, why wouldn't it be? I mean, why wouldn't you want a global index, given that the ones that we're comparing ourselves with are also global? But it's such a massive project. It has to be done in phases. And so we didn't limit ourselves to EU when we did the first and the pilot, although most countries turned out to be in the EU. I think in future, the phases towards going global would include a possible experiment, a pilot in Latin America, and also development in relation to 27 EU countries plus UK, depending on funding.
Fascinating. Naomi Sakr, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
After talking to Naomi about the index, I'm interested to learn more about how it can be used. So I thought I'd talk to Milica Pesic, the Executive Director of Media Diversity Institute.
The index can be a really useful tool to different sectors. Either we talk about laws or regulations, we talk about media, or different groups like civil society organizations representing different groups as an advocacy tool when they talk to policymakers, when they talk to media, when they talk to regulators. It can be useful for researchers, so academic level, and definitely policymakers. The Media Diversity Index is not a magic wand. It's like press freedom index. It doesn't mean if it exists that the media will be less or more free. It's just an indicator or barometer which way we have to go. So in case of Media Diversity Index, we should look at the environment. Where are the gaps? Laws, legislation, regulations, then media, workplace, recruitment, then, whether everyone has access to the media, whether they are represented in the right way, in professional, ethical way, and we should look at compliance. So basically, we believe that this index can help not only these sectors, these different fields I just listed, but also in particular organizations which represent different communities, different minorities, different vulnerable groups, to use it as an advocacy tool. And, go to the media and say, you can do it better and let's do it together, or going to the policymakers or the lawmakers that things need to be done better. But there is still this question, why we should do that. And this is, where, as we usually say, like stick and carrots, like use, what is the regulations? Are you following the regulations? But in case of the media in particular, we need to find a way, and we call it business case for diversity, to offer packages to the media to see why they can benefit from being inclusive of different communities, not only in profit-wise, but also, broadening the audience, raising the trust, because as we know, journalists are almost the last on the scale, on the list of how much people believe certain professions. And then it can be helpful to policymakers. And we know that on the European level, there is a big interest among policymakers to see how at these very divided times or polarized times where there is a toxic discourse in the public domain, how can we do it better to contribute to social cohesion?
My thanks to Milica for explaining how useful the index will be to so many different organisations and groups. That's all for this episode of Diversity Matters, brought to you by Media Diversity Institute, or MDI. If you've enjoyed it, please do like and share it. You can also listen to earlier episodes and find more information on MDI on our website. That's media-diversity.org. And of course, you'll find the index there under the Research Centre, so do take a look. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to your company again. Take care.